Here I can see Cynthia behind a screen. So if anybody feels brave enough to put their videos back on so I can see how this is landing, that would be great. So thanks for the introduction, Ken, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. And thanks again to Ken and Craig for inviting me to talk today, and also to Cynthia, who's going to help support the discussion afterwards. So I believe the circular economy in its current version isn't fit for purpose. I see it being watered down and cherry-picked. I think we need to evolve it so it becomes a framework to create the future that the world needs. And to give you a little bit of my journey, like many of you I suspect, the circular economy changed my life. For several decades, I'd been proud to work for multinational companies including Kellogg's, Tesco and DHL, managing projects, managing risk, designing systems and solutions, consulting for clients. But over the years, I was becoming more and more concerned about sustainability issues, and all I could see around me was businesses making incremental improvements. And when I talked to colleagues and clients, people saw sustainability and healthy, profitable business as being incompatible. And as I kind of thought about that, I realized that all I was doing in my day job was helping big businesses sell more stuff we probably didn't need and get a bit more efficient and effective at doing that. So in effect, I was part of the problem as well. So back in 2010, I started a quest to understand the scale of the problem so I could explain it to people and obviously look for possible solutions. But after months and months of research, more than I ever did for my MSc thesis, I couldn't see any way forward. It just felt like I was in a dark tunnel, and now the problems looked a lot more complicated and were worse than I'd even thought. But along the way, I'd come across various bits of new terminology, things like industrial ecology, biomimicry, even 3D printing was pretty new back then. And one of those new bits of terminology was the circular economy. And the first book I read was this one, sorry for the shiny cover, printed off on DHL's printers, written by Ken Webster and Craig Johnson. And that was my kind of eye-opening moment into what the circular economy was all about. So suddenly there was a light at the end of that dark tunnel. After that, I started to give talks to professional groups, colleagues and clients, and my boss was very supportive. But then, in the way of big businesses, we had a restructure, and my new boss couldn't give a monkey's about sustainability. And so I decided to quit corporate life and go all in on helping businesses and people understand what the circular economy was all about and how it could create or help create more resilient, sustainable and profitable businesses. So a few years later, Kogan Page asked me to do the first edition of the Circular Economy Handbook. And I was already collecting examples, but most of those were from small businesses and startups of businesses creating circular products, circular materials, circular business models, sharing systems, and so on. And I was struggling to find examples from big businesses. But I was keen to include those because I felt it helped give credibility to the fact that people were taking the circular economy seriously. And so one of the examples I managed to find was some things that Ford said they were doing, a various sort of list of circular things. And one of those was an announcement back in 2014 that Ford was working with Heinz to find a way of turning waste tomato skins, waste tomato peel, into bioplastics. And I felt pretty skeptical about that. And I even noted in the book that the announcement from Ford was dated June, so it couldn't be an April Fool's joke. But sure enough, a few years later, when I had a look to see what had happened, nothing. So was that circular wash? We'll probably never know. Fast forward a couple more years, and then writing the second edition of the book. This time, hundreds more examples that I could put in, but again, mostly from small businesses. And the examples I'm finding from big businesses are mostly statements of ambition, experiments, and pilot schemes. And there's lots of focus on what I call new generation materials and recycling innovations. In the book, I was highlighting the need for slowing and shrinking so that we're slowing the flow of production and shrinking our human footprint. So I wanted to build on the work of scholars, including Nancy Bocken and team, Martin Giesdorfer and team, John Mulroe and Victoria Santos. So I have set out 4 goals to slow, intensify, close and regenerate, and also to narrow the loop. Plus, I was highlighting the risks of rebound and citing the paper from Trevor Zink and Roland Geyer in 2017. And now I'm trying to highlight the connected challenges that we face. Fragile planet, finite resources and people everywhere all around the world under pressure. And whatever we do to try and fix one area impacts on the other too. So why am I saying the circular economy framework's not fit for purpose? You might be thinking that the circular economy is the best tool that we have for trying to create a more sustainable way of doing things. And for years I've thought that as well. But we've got no control over it. We've already heard today about Kirchner's study with over 100 different definitions. So people can, define it in any way that suits them. And even experts aren't aligned on what it should include. I heard the author of a popular book on the circular economy talking about how deep sea mining was part of the circular economy. As we've heard today, it can be cherry picked. Businesses and organizations can focus on circulating instead of slowing the flow of production by creating more durable, repairable, and shareable products. And it's all about pushing more through the pipeline every year, following that mantra that we've got to sell more, we've got to grow the economy. And people think that the only way to do that is by pushing more stuff through the system. And yet we know that production and consumption is responsible for over 95% of global water stress, over 95% of global biodiversity loss, and over half of global greenhouse gas emissions. And just by swapping finite materials for renewable or recycled materials, we're not really doing much about all the pollution and the waste in the system. It's still there in the way that we produce things. And the other thing I'm worried about, which again we've touched on at a few points today, is that we're not addressing the social issues that are highlighted by things like Kate Raworth's donut. So affordability, a just transition, provision of meaningful jobs, and the issues of colonialization of waste and pollution. You might also be thinking that, the circular economy is gaining traction, it's becoming more and more well known, so we should keep the momentum going and not muddy the waters. But again, I'd argue that what we think of as the circular economy is being diluted. Businesses and consultants are using circular approaches to just keep growing the system. It's about a bit less bad. And I'm also noticing what I call false solutions, and I wrote an article about that a year or so ago. So, for example, new generation materials, perhaps where we're swapping from finite resources to biological resources. And vegan leathers are a good example. Nearly all the publicity that you see about those when we're talking about leathers made from mushrooms or pineapples or rice husks, whatever, forget to mention that they include a significant proportion of synthetic materials, plastics, to give them structure and strength. So in effect, we've swapped from something that perhaps was recyclable to something that can't be recycled because now it's a mixture of biological and technical materials. And that brings me on to recycling. And I think the petrochemical companies see that as a get out of jail free card. As we put pressure on them to reduce the flow of virgin plastics and virgin synthetic textiles, they're just seeing providing chemicals to do the recycling as another way to replace that revenue stream. They see it as their future, so they're really keen on it. As an example, if we look at recycled polyester, we're seeing clothing brands going all in on that, including my favourite, Patagonia. So recycled polyester fleece seems like a good thing, but as we're finding out, it's primarily using recycled PET bottles, and those could have gone around the food packaging system over and over again. Instead, we've put them into a garment that's then going to not be recycled at the end of its life. As we know, only about 1% of textiles are recycled. So again, we've taken something that could have been recycled and put it into a system where it's going to end up in landfill or incineration. On top of that, we've got the issue of microfibers. We already know that microfibers come out of polyester fabrics when we wear them, when we wash them. Recycled PET, recycled polyester, creates 2.5 times as many microfibers. So it seems like we're solving one problem, but in fact we're creating multiple different problems. There's also the risk of rebound. And you probably remember a study a couple of years ago saying that when car sharing systems like Uber and Lyft get going in US cities, the result is an increase in overall car miles. Maybe it's just the deep pockets of the investors behind those models like Uber and Lyft that allows them to underprice every other form of transport, including public transport. And they do that until they've got a monopoly situation. But again, we've created something that's not socially equitable. We know they're part of the gig economy, and it's not taking us in a more sustainable direction. And we've also got the criticisms behind clothing rental and resale. You probably remember that study on jeans a couple of years ago with the headline saying that renting jeans was a worse option than just keeping them and throwing them away at the end. And of course, many of us probably looked at that example and thought, well, why on earth would you pick jeans to be rented? Who's going to rent jeans and actually drive to a shop to swap them for a new pair every couple of weeks? And we can see lots of examples where clothing rental and resale is a better option. So for children's clothing, for expensive garments that we might only wear once or twice. But there's a big scale. And lots of companies, I think, are starting to see rental and resale as an opportunity to just keep going with the fast fashion model. So again, it seems like we've got something circular, and that fits into the definition of circular, but it's not actually taking us in the right direction. So we need more products that are durable, repairable, and designed to be upgraded, and we need business models that take responsibility for keeping things in circulation. And we need those to be the sort of primary objectives of the circular economy, not just something that can be cherry-picked if it suits you. And I guess you're also thinking that lots of people, including all of us, and lots of organisations are working on this now, so maybe it's a mistake to undermine it. But I'd argue we need to evolve it rather than undermine it. Recognise the gaps and the grey areas, some of which we've talked about earlier, and come up with something that takes us forward in the right direction. A couple of years ago, I was thinking about this and trying to come up with a model that I would kind of want a business to look like. And I came up with what I've called our FAIR manifesto. So F is fair trade, fair labour and fair taxes. A is authenticity, honesty, transparency. I is about inclusive business models, so things like employee ownership and cooperatives. And then R is regenerative, saying we need to go further than circular and we need to regenerate materials, nature, and communities, society in general. So I think if we stick with the circular economy, we're helping support meaningless action, and we've effectively become part of the problem. And I'd say there are three things I'd like you to take away. First, that we need to get clear on how to make the circular economy fit for purpose. So circular does improve sustainability by regenerating nature, resources and communities, and making sure we're shrinking our footprint, not just coming up with slightly cleaner circulation flows. Secondly, we need solutions that address the societal issues. So we're creating meaningful jobs, vibrant communities, healthy food and environments. And thirdly, we need a way of protecting the IP, not in the way that we can make money out of it, as we talked about earlier today, but a way of making sure that it can't be hijacked and diluted by vested interests. So And I don't see the ISO standard as a way of doing that either. I think it needs something where people who really care about this are involved in evolving the definition and keeping it alive going forward. So in the discussion, I'd like us to focus on what we could do. How do we define what is needed? Should it be informed by the donut, by natural step, by regenerative economics? And what's the most important missing element? Is it the social aspects? Is it about the need for slowing and shrinking our footprint? Is it about the need for a just transition? And going forward, if we come up with something that's better, that's fit for purpose, how do we prevent that from also being hijacked? So back in 2010, I realized that I was in service to big business, helping it get more efficient and effective at selling more stuff we probably didn't need. And I was working against the more sustainable world that I believed was possible. And I'm sure we've all been faced over our careers with the realization that something we chose, something we fell in love with, an idea that we bought into, turns out to have some flaws. And it's difficult to be objective about that when we've invested so much in it. And particularly when it's something that helps define us. You know, maybe we've pinned our whole careers on it, like me. But if we don't recognise the flaws and the limitations and the gaps in the way the circular economy is developed, then we'll just be part of the problem too. So I think if we don't act on this now, we'll lose more time and allow more false solutions to creep in. Policies and business strategies that just focus on growth that's a bit less bad, but still comes at the expense of people and our planet. We need a circular economy that's fit for future generations. So let's go out and co-create it. Thank you.